Good morning, reef builders. Jake Adams back at you with another awesome video from the natural reef. In the previous videos, I was on the west end of Guadalcanal at Morale Sound, basically restarting a coral farming collective. And now I am on the west side of the central provinces in an island called Sandfly. And this is a place I've actually been before. And right in this water, right offshore, is a really beautiful, healthy, diverse reef. And I took a preliminary dip yesterday and just totally blew my mind. There's even a couple really big, large Gygas clams. So I have a bunch of dive tanks, and I'm going to start off by snorkeling this reef, really explore the shallows, kind of map out where I want to dive in, and then we'll come back on land, chat about it a little bit, and we'll do a dive after that, kind of go off the edge and see what some of the deeper corals that we can find. So thanks for joining me on another amazing travelogue episode here in the Solomon Islands. There's some ridiculously nice corals and reef life here, so we're gonna go take a look, and just can't wait to show you guys.
The purpose of the snorkel is to get a lay of the reef and do some reconnaissance, take note of some of the more special animals that I come across, and see where will be a good place to dive in after this snorkel. So follow along with me as I point out some of the more interesting critters, and there's a lot of great stuff to see in the shallow water. The first really cool thing that I come across is a trio of large, mature, giant clams. There's 3 of them. They were about 3 to 4 feet long, and it's comforting to know that they're together, so if they spawn, they can successfully reproduce. There's so much to see and so much life on the reef, it's simply impossible to take it all in on your first swim. And so it's fun for me to rewatch the footage and see all the animals swimming by. So if you have a keen eye, you can spot a lot of really cool, diverse animals. One of the first corals to really catch my eye is this thicket of a really nice blue-tipped bottlebrush Acropora. It doesn't look like an Echinata or a Speciosa. It's probably closer to something like a Taraki, but either way, it's nice to see a really nice thriving thicket of bottlebrush acro in such shallow water. One coral that's really hard to appreciate when it's small in aquariums is Platygyra, but on the other end, it's really hard to miss when you see a very large, healthy colony out in the wild. So I always like to take a moment and just really appreciate this coral for what it is. Not the most colorful, but this thing must have been growing for hundreds of years. We tend to think of flower pot corals as being either yellow or reds or shades in between, but one particular species is Acropora tenuidens. And it's really cool to see a very healthy colony absorbing and taking in as much light as any SPS coral seen here in just like 4 to 5 feet of water. This is one part of the reef that is just so thick with corals. They're intertwined, Acropora, Montipora, all different species, and it's really hard to make sense of where one ends and the other begins. But you can see just branching varieties, some Lobophilia, the branching Montipora varicosa, Montipora stellata, and they're just all mixed in and intertwined and competing for space here in this shallow reef environment. At this part of the reef, we come across a section that's beginning to be dominated by a purple Acropora. It's hard to tell if this is Acropora tortuosa or austera, but it grows for definitely tens of yards. And in this particular area, an aggressive damselfish is defending the algae that he grows at the base of these branches. One thing that is very surprising to see in this very shallow water is some hammer coral. This Euphyllia ancora is way more often seen at about 30 to 40 feet deep, so it's really neat to see it in really shallow water growing right alongside all the SPS corals. Another coral which is best appreciated in the wild is Pavona varians. In home aquariums, Pavona tends to be really flat, but in the wild you can see they develop really contorted and gnarled corallites. Finally, we encounter our first Acropora millipora, and what a beautiful colony. This pink specimen of Acromilli had yellow tips and green polyps. There's so many milliporas in Solomon Islands, you can expect to see a whole lot more of this species in the upcoming videos. This colony is not necessarily in its prime, but I actually zoomed in to take a look at this coral-eating butterfly fish. It's strange to notice that where there's healthy corals, there's a lot of coral-eating butterfly fish. So in a strange way, it's a good indication that this is a healthy reef for SPS corals.
To get up again in an armful of a friend.
One of the most uncommon ways to encounter bubble-tip anemones is actually as colonies that are growing inside the branches of an SPS coral, such as this Parietes. In this grouping of bubble-tip anemones, you can actually see broom clownfish and tomato clownfish living side by side and defending their home anemones. A short distance away, there's a single crispa anemone with a Clarkii clownfish in it. What really grabbed my attention was this precocious Moorish idol being aggressive and defending this little spot on the reef. I don't usually ever see that for Moorish idols, so we're gonna give him his space.
Since you searching courage to get up again in an armful of a friend.
By now you can probably tell that I've made my way over some midwater, and this is where things start to get really interesting, because this is where you start finding some very large and also unusual coral. On the large side is this huge colony of Diploastria. This thing has probably been growing for 1,000 years or more. You can tell that it's probably died back once or twice in its history and has started to regrow and recover the structure that it probably created itself. At this point, I'm snorkeling over about 25 feet of warm, tropical, clear water, but the light is filtered out and looks starting to look a little bit blue down in the depths. So it really takes a keen eye and a very fresh search image to start spotting some of the more interesting and unusual coral. And it doesn't take long till I find a coral that really stuck with me throughout the entire trip. I remember this moment very clearly because I saw a nondescript patch of Acropora that looked a little bit bluer than it should for that depth. So I snorkeled down to take a closer look, and sure enough, it was this gorgeous strain of blue Acropora that I've never seen in the wild. So I swam back down and grabbed a small piece to bring up to the surface and get a closer look to try and see if I could determine which species it is, and just to see how blue it is when I bring it up into the shallow water. Acropora is commonly found in either a light brown, light gray, rarely green, and sometimes even red. So this blue morph is going to be a really fun strain. Circle back around to where I started my snorkel, and I have to pay respect to these giants of the reef, these 3 and also very rare Tridacnid gigas clams. But as I make my way towards shore, I encounter something that the Solomon Islands is very well known for, and that is true Percula clownfish. The combination of bright orange, deep black, and brilliant white is just something that I never gets old. And as an added bonus, this particular large specimen has an aberrant pattern on one side.
That was just absolutely incredible. I don't think I was even snorkeling that long and found What didn't we find? We find acros, montes, Acropora, LPS corals, even a colony of hammer coral in like 2 feet of water. I never imagined that I see a hammer coral in such shallow water. I think right now I just got out of the water and I'm still kind of a little bit floored by what I saw, but hopefully while I was editing all the footage, I gave you some better commentary on what we saw. Those 3 giant clams are huge. Like the biggest one is at least 4 feet across. And it's really cool that they're together so that when they spawn, their gametes will actually get fertilized and create more babies. What else did we see? Oh, man, for me, definitely like seeing the millies is awesome. But I saw this little patch of thin blue branching stony coral, and I just assumed it was probably like a gray thin branching monopora, but it was actually blue Acropora. I think it's this very unique species, Puerto Galerae. It's like really spiny, a really spiny species of Acropora. Really a treat to see that. I've actually never seen that in person in the wild or in aquariums. And then, yeah, we'll finish off the little quick snorkel, a morning scouting snorkeling expedition with a beautiful trio. There's actually 3, but we saw 2. True perculate clownfish, with the larger one having a slightly aberrant barring and striping. Just absolutely, and it was bold, just came right up to the camera. So I hope you guys really enjoyed that, because in the next video I'm gonna go further off the reef. We're gonna go dive deep and have a totally different camera for that. So it's gonna be some interesting footage. So if you don't wanna miss that, definitely subscribe, hit that notification bell, and very curious to see what your comments are about seeing real wild corals on the natural reef and in their natural state, because we have a lot of ideas about where corals come from, but you know, until you actually see them, you don't know. So thanks for tuning in. I'm going to have a little kai and then jump into my my dive gear and dive over here and see what we can find on the other side of the reef. So I'll catch you guys on the next video.